That bulldozer aimed at my grandmother's greenhouse wasn't just clearing property. They were digging up a secret that should have stayed buried. I smelled the diesel before I saw the bulldozer. 8 years running federal soil toxicity audits will do that to you. You learn to read the air before your eyes catch up. That morning, the smell meant somebody had driven heavy equipment onto my grandmother's property. Julian Thorne took the turn onto the dirt road too fast, gravel kicking against the wheel wells, and I had a hand braced on the door for the first time in the 10 years he'd been driving me places. He still had his court suit on from the red-eye out of Sacramento. Tie knotted perfect. Face doing something I'd never seen it do before. Flat, controlled, and furious underneath it at the same time. She didn't pick up. 40 minutes, Leo, 40 minutes. I didn't answer. I was already looking past the windshield at the yellow bulldozer idling in the side yard. 4 men in black uniforms with no patches on them. A white SUV with a Sterling AgroCorp decal on the door, and Iris Thorne standing in the greenhouse doorway in her gray cardigan like her body alone could hold a door shut against a machine built to knock down walls. Julian hadn't cut the engine before I had mine open. The ground under my boots was already torn up. Someone had run the dozer through the yard once already, before we ever got here, and taken out 2 lavender bushes Grandma had planted 3 years back. And I'm telling you for the last time, ma'am, a man in a pale coat was saying, his back to me. I have a municipal order, and if you don't step away from that door, my security team is going to carry you out. That's going to look a lot less dignified than you sitting in your chair and waiting inside. I knew the voice before I saw the face. Business magazine smug. Like he'd never once in his life had to raise it to get what he wanted. Carter Sterling turned around when my shadow hit the toe of his shoe. 35, maybe. But something in his face made him look older. The corners of his mouth already sagging like a man who'd been disappointed by people for a very long time and had stopped being surprised by it. This is private property, I said. That's a running bulldozer 30 feet from an occupied residence with a legally blind 80-year-old inside. Move it 1 more foot and I'm documenting a demolition safety violation. I know exactly how to make that stick. And you are? Leo Thorne. That's my grandmother. Something crossed his face. Not fear, closer to relief, like he'd been waiting for this exact conversation and was glad to finally have it over with. His eyes dropped to the badge already in my hand. I hadn't decided to pull it. My hand just did it. Federal auditor. He drew the words out, tasting them. Didn't know Iris had connections like that? Iris has a grandson who reads paperwork for a living. Show me the order. Big words for a man who audits dirt for a living. I audit contamination sites that kill crops and sometimes kill people, Mr. Sterling. Dirt's usually the least of it. Show me the order. He pulled a folded sheet from his jacket and held it out between 2 fingers, like touching me might cost him something. Julian, I said without looking away from the page. He was already at my shoulder. He took it and read the way he reads everything before hearing. Not the words, the anchor points. Dates, signatures, seals. This is a zoning cease and desist, he said. Dated 2 days ago. Signed by an F. Walsh. He looked up. Frank Walsh resigned as chair of the zoning board 11 months ago. I know because I sat across from him at his last hearing. So either you're holding a document signed by a man who can't legally sign it anymore, Mr. Sterling, or somebody handed you a forgery and didn't tell you. Either way, you don't have a permit. Nobody said anything for 3 full seconds. One of the black uniformed guys traded a look with another. The dozer operator, older guy, tired face, glanced back at Carter, waiting on a call. I looked at the operator, not at Carter. Kill the engine. He looked at Carter instead. Carter didn't answer right away. I watched him run the math, pride against liability. Whether an 80-year-old woman with a grandson who audits federal sites for a living was actually going to sue him over an illegal demolition. Kill it, Carter said, not turning around. The engine died. In the quiet after it, I heard water dripping off the greenhouse gutter, and behind me, Grandma finally breathing all the way in, like she hadn't let herself since we pulled up. Carter walked closer than he needed to. His cologne was expensive and a little too aggressive, like it was covering for something. "You two always show up right on time," he said. "Quiet, just for me. Just like your father used to." My spine went cold. "What did you say?" He smiled slow, like he was tasting that too. "Nothing, just noticing a resemblance." He took 2 steps toward the SUV, then half-turned so only I could see his face. "You look like him, especially right now, steady, confident." He looked exactly like that too, right before the fire. He let the words sit there a beat longer than it needed to. "You should have stayed gone, Mr. Thorne." He got in the SUV without waiting for anything back. His crew loaded the trailer in silence. Efficient, like nothing had happened here at all. I couldn't move for a few seconds after the SUV cleared the bend. Julian's hand landed on my shoulder, heavy. "He knew our names before you said them," he said. I heard, and he said fire. I heard that too. We both turned toward the greenhouse doorway. Grandma still had both hands locked on the frame, knuckles gone white. Her face, usually so calm it bordered on serene, had gone pale, and in eyes that hadn't focused past 3 feet in 15 years, I saw something I had never once seen there before. Her mouth moved like she was about to say a name and then didn't. I'd known that woman my entire life, and I had never once seen her look like that. Whatever Carter Sterling had just done to her with 4 sentences and a smirk, it wasn't fear. It went deeper than fear, and it scared me worse than the bulldozer had. The cottage smelled like damp earth and old paper, the same mix it had smelled like my whole life, and I had never once managed to break it down into its parts, even though breaking down smells was literally my job. Grandma sat in the chair by the window, the one with the faded green velvet, hands still in her lap. Too still. She usually fidgeted with the edge of her shawl. Not today. Julian made tea because his hands needed something to do, and set the cup close enough that she could find it by touch. "Grandma." I crouched in front of her chair. What did he mean about the fire? She didn't answer right away. The old mechanical clock ticked on the wall, the one she wound by hand every night, even though she could have bought a battery one decades ago. I should have told you boys a long time ago. Her voice came out steadier than I expected, and that scared me more than if it had shaken. I kept telling myself, not now. One more quiet year. 25 of them went by like that. Told us what? Julian's voice cracked on the last word. I'd never heard it do that. She turned toward the sound of him. I'm not your grandmother. What? I said it even though I'd heard her fine. My brain was just looking for a way to argue with it. Not by blood. She stopped. Her hands, still until now, started working at the arm of the chair. Your parents were David and Sarah Wright, researchers. Mine, we worked together. David understood soil chemistry better than I ever did. Sarah saw patterns in numbers the rest of us couldn't. Julian sat down hard on the floor next to me, like his legs had stopped taking instructions. Right? I said, testing the name out loud, the way you test a step on a staircase you don't trust. That's our actual name. It was, Grandma said. David Wright and Sarah Wright. I want you to hear me say it plainly, because I never let myself say it out loud in this house, not once in 25 years, and I think that was a mistake. We were building a soil remediation formula, she said. The one that got called the Thorne Sterling patent later, after they scrubbed my name off it before the ink dried. You were both a little over a year old. David and Sarah worked late a lot. We were close to scaling it. and they'd leave you here." Her hand stopped moving. "The lab burned down. Fire department called it faulty wiring. That was a lie. I signed off on that wiring myself 6 months before. It was new." "You think it was murder?" I said. She didn't answer that one softly. "I know it was. Thomas Sterling built his whole company on patents he stole from us. David and Sarah started asking him questions directly because they found paperwork proving his registration happened 3 months before we'd even finished the formula. That's not possible. Not unless somebody stole the drafts first." She reached out and found my hand, gripped it harder than I expected from someone her size. "I took you both that same night. Found a notary I trusted. Changed the paperwork so nothing would ever connect you to the right lab. Raised you as my grandsons. Because if Thomas Sterling ever found out his victims had children, alive, nearby, old enough one day to start asking questions..." She shook her head. "I needed you ordinary, invisible, not the heirs of 2 dead scientists." 25 years, Julian said. "You've known this for 25 years and never said one word." Silence kept you alive, Julian. She said his name the way she always did when she wanted him to hear what was underneath it, not just the sentence. "You think I didn't want to tell you? Every year on your parents' birthday? But every time I pictured Thomas Sterling learning David and Sarah's sons were alive 15 miles from his estate, I saw the same fire again." She pushed herself up out of the chair, waving off my hand before I could offer it. A small gesture I'd known since I was 6, and it always meant the same thing. "I can do this myself, and it matters to me that I do." She crossed to the windowsill where her orchids sat in clay pots, found the 3rd one from the left by touch. The near-black variety she called her stubborn child, because it only bloomed once every 2 years, and not always then. She pushed her fingers into the dirt, deeper than checking moisture would ever require, until I heard metal scrape against ceramic. She came back with a key in her palm. Old brass, dark green in the grooves, a number cut crude into the bow. 47. "That opens the pump house," she said, holding it out. Dirt fell off it onto the carpet. "There's a safe buried out there. Before the fire, David gave me documents. Told me, 'Iris, if anything happens to me, hide this somewhere Thomas would never think to look.' I never opened it. I was too scared. Felt like if I did, the fire would come find me too." "Why now?" Julian asked. "Why tonight and not last year?" She turned toward the window, toward the shape of the greenhouse she could no longer see but knew was still standing. "Because Carter Sterling didn't come here about zoning," she said. "He wants what's under this land, not the land itself. Thomas spent his whole life terrified that proof would surface. He's dead now. Carter's finalizing a merger, and any hint their flagship technology was stolen costs him billions. They didn't bring a bulldozer because they need the dirt boys. She found our faces without being able to see them. They came because they're afraid I still have it. And now that you're both standing here, they're more afraid than ever." Julian was quiet for a long moment, turning the key over in his fingers like he could read the rest of the story off the metal. 25 years of pretending to be someone you're not, just to keep us safe. I didn't pretend to be your grandmother, Julian. Her voice sharpened, just slightly. The first flash of real steel since she'd started talking. I raised you. I sat up with both of you through fevers and heartbreak and every bad decision either of you ever made in your 20s. That part was never a lie. The name on the paperwork was the only thing I ever hid from you. I watched something in his face let go, just a fraction at that. We waited for dark, mostly because it took that long to talk Grandma out of coming with us. By the time she agreed to stay behind with Mateo Cruz watching the road, the sky had gone that bruised, heavy blue that comes right before full black. The pump house sat past the last row of almond trees, where the irrigation lines had gone dry years ago. Nobody had touched this corner of the property in a decade. You could smell it. Stagnant water somewhere underground. The green stink of algae left alone long enough to build its own little ecosystem. "Watch the vines," Julian said, flashlight cutting low. Wild grape had swallowed half the structure, laced through a rusted tin roof. I pushed a curtain of leaves aside and cold water ran down my wrist. The steel door had a padlock so corroded it had practically fused to the hasp. I fit the brass key in anyway. Nothing for a second. Then the tumblers gave. Reluctant, grinding, like the lock had been waiting 25 years just to remember how to work. And the shackle cracked open, loud in all that silence. Inside, the air smelled different. Drier. Motor oil gone waxy with age. Dust. Under it, faint, the mineral smell of old iron. Julian's light found the floor safe first, sunk into a concrete pad in the corner. Bank vault heavy, wrong for a pump house. Somebody had built a false floor over most of the room to hide it. You could see the seam if you knew to look. "She said the key," I muttered, running a thumb over a second keyhole under the handle, cut for the same bit pattern. It turned on the first try. The door groaned open. Inside, wrapped in a dry cleaning bag gone brittle and yellow, sat a stack of composition notebooks and a manila folder, the rubber band around it crumbling to powder the second Julian touched it. I opened the top notebook. Small, cramped handwriting. Someone writing fast, like they were afraid of running out of time before they ran out of things to say. March 4th. Formula stability holding at 94% after 30-day exposure. TS asked for the full data set again today. Something's off about how he asked. Not curious. Checking. "That's not Grandma's handwriting," Julian said. "No." My chest went tight. "That's our father's." He didn't say anything to that. Just reached over and gripped my forearm once, hard, the way he used to when we were kids, and one of us needed to know the other one was actually there. "There's a second one." He pulled another notebook free. Rounder handwriting, faster, things underlined twice. "Our mother's," I said before he could tell me. I don't know how I knew. I just did. The same way you know your own name without having to think about it. We didn't talk. My knees went numb on the concrete before either of us said a word out loud, because reading our mother's handwriting for the first time in our lives felt like something you shouldn't interrupt with your own voice. That's when the radios crackled outside. Not close yet, but close enough that I caught the static hiss of a two-way and a man's voice flattened by distance. "Perimeter's clear north side, moving to the pump station." Julian killed the flashlight so fast the dark hit me like a wall. "Patrol," he whispered. "Sterling runs a sweep on the property line at night. Grandma said so. Or he knows exactly where we are. We didn't wait to find out which." Julian swept the notebooks and the folder into his duffel bag. I eased the safe shut, quiet, not silent, and every sound felt like a gunshot. And we backed toward the door as a flashlight beam swept across the window. "Hey!" A voice, young, more startled than aggressive. "Somebody's in there?" We went out through a gap in the vines Julian had already scouted. Boots hit gravel behind us. 2 sets, then 3. Radios calling coordinates I didn't have time to process. Julian grabbed my arm and pulled me left, into the dead irrigation ditch instead of open ground, because open ground is where flashlights find you. A shape rounded the corner of the pump house just as we dropped. His light swept past close enough that I felt it graze the top of my head and kept going. I lay flat in 3 inches of standing ditch water with my heart going so hard I was sure he'd hear it, and counted to 10 before I let myself breathe again. "Private security," Julian breathed once we'd put 30 yards behind us. "Not police. They can't legally detain us on our own family's land without cause. Tell that to the 4 guys with radios currently hunting us across it." "I intend to." Loudly. "If they get close enough." Nobody did. We came out through the almond rows a quarter-mile down from where we'd gone in. My hands were shaking by the time we reached the car. Not fear exactly, more the aftershock that hits once your body realizes the danger's over and finally lets you feel what you didn't have time to feel a minute ago. I didn't open the folder until we were on the county road. Dome light on, Julian driving slower than he needed to so the words wouldn't jump on the page. Patent logs. Dozens of pages, initialed by both our parents, dated across 14 months. Near the back, in a paper sleeve gone soft at the corners, a single photograph. Our father, younger than I'd ever pictured him, laughing at something out of frame, standing next to a man in a gray suit I didn't recognize. Both of them holding a bound report between them, the kind of stiff smile people give for a photo they didn't ask to be in. On the back, in Grandma's handwriting, Wright and Delgado. Patent Office, 1997. Delgado, Julian said, reading over my shoulder, eyes still on the road. That's a name. That's a federal patent administrator's name. I felt the tingle again, the one I get on sight when the numbers in front of me stop matching what I already believed. This isn't Thomas Sterling buying off a local zoning board, Julian. If Dad was standing next to somebody from the federal office the same year Sterling filed, then this didn't stay local. His knuckles went white on the wheel. It went all the way to Washington. My phone woke me at 6:40, buzzing hard enough against the nightstand that I knew before I looked it wasn't good news. 14 texts, 3 missed calls from Julian, 1 from a Sacramento number I didn't recognize. A reporter, I'd learned 20 minutes later. I played the reporter's voicemail first, standing barefoot on the kitchen tile. A woman's voice, professionally sympathetic in a way that somehow made it worse. Mr. Thorne, I'd love to get your side before this runs at 7. You have about 40 minutes. I hadn't even known there was a story yet, and already there was a clock on it. I turned on the local news out of habit. Coffee not even started. And there I was. Grainy black and white security footage, time-stamped 2 nights back. The kind of angle you get from a warehouse camera mounted too high and too wide. A figure that was unmistakably me, ducking through a fence gap. Another unmistakably Julian, shoving something the Chiron called unidentified materials into a bag. Breaking. Corporate espionage suspects identified in Sterling AgroCorp break-in. I stood there holding the remote and watched myself, on tape, shoulder check a security guard hard enough to knock him down, which had not happened, which I would have remembered happening, which meant somebody had spliced 2 unrelated clips together and stopped caring whether the geometry lined up. My phone rang. Julian, turn on channel 9, I said before he could get a word out. I'm looking at channel 4, same footage. His voice had that flat, controlled sound it gets right before it cracks. Leo, they're calling it corporate espionage. Assault on private security. That guard never touched me. I never touched him. I know that. You know that. A pause, papers shuffling on his end, or him pacing. My managing partner called 4 minutes ago. Julian, administrative leave, effective immediately. He said, and I'm quoting, "The firm can't have its name anywhere near an active criminal investigation into trespassing and industrial theft. Regardless," his words, "of the merits." I sat down hard on the edge of my bed. Neither of us said anything for a second. I could hear the same news loop playing somewhere behind him too. "They didn't have this footage 2 days ago," I said slowly. "This wasn't sitting on a server waiting to be found. Somebody built it. Doesn't matter who built it if a judge signs a warrant off it." He exhaled long, forcing himself back into lawyer mode because the alternative was falling apart on the phone. I already checked the county docket, active bench warrant, both our names. I opened my laptop out of pure reflex, the same motion I make every morning at 6:45 to check overnight lab results, and typed my federal credentials into the audit database like I had 10,000 times. Access denied. Contact your regional administrator. I tried again slower in case I'd fat-fingered something. Same message. Julian, My voice came out flatter than I meant. I'm locked out of the federal system. What? Soil toxicity database. Dead. I stared at the screen like it might change its mind. You don't lock a federal auditor out over a local trespassing charge. Somebody made a call. So that's it, Julian said, and I'd never heard him sound like that. Not scared exactly. Stripped down. No firm behind me. No federal backup behind you. A warrant with both our names on footage that didn't happen the way it's being shown. Did you call Grandma? I asked. Twice. No answer. Mateo's not answering either. A pause on the line, and I heard him swallow. Leo, if they can fabricate footage and pull federal credentials in under 24 hours, I don't love the idea of her sitting alone at that cottage right now. I'll drive out. Not in your own car, not on your own phone. Whoever did this is watching for exactly that. I stood in my kitchen holding a phone that felt heavier than it should have, running through everything I owned that Carter Sterling's people might already be tracking. My car, my badge, my apartment lease, my own name on a warrant that hadn't existed 12 hours earlier. It was a strange thing, realizing how much of your own life could be turned into a leash if the right person decided to pull on it. I looked at the duffel bag still sitting by my door, the one with our mother's handwriting inside it. Neither of us had touched it since the drive home, because some part of both of us had wanted one more night just being sad about our parents, before we had to start being careful about them too. We're on our own, I said. Yeah. A long breath on the line. We're on our own. Neither of us hung up right away. We just sat there, 2 phones, 2 empty rooms, listening to each other breathe, because right then that was the only proof either of us had that the other one was still standing. We paid cash for a room at the Sundown Motor Inn, the kind of place neither of us had stayed in since college. Julian's idea. He'd read enough discovery requests to know exactly what a card statement could tell somebody looking for you. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same looping clip, my own shape doing something I hadn't done, and my brain kept trying to solve it like a lab problem. Running the tape back frame by frame, looking for the seam. Julian was on his second burner phone of the day when it buzzed with a number neither of us recognized. Don't, I said when he moved to silence it. Whoever set us up wants us jumpy enough to run from every unknown number. Let's not do them that favor. He answered on the 4th ring, put it on speaker, said nothing. Mr. Thorne? A young voice, tight with nerves. It's Mateo. Mateo Cruz from the Eastridge lab. Please don't hang up. I know this sounds bad. I got your number from Deb at the front desk. I didn't have another way to reach you. How do you know us? Julian's voice went careful, flat, the tone he uses on hostile witnesses. I work the water quality bench. I've seen you both around. Your grandmother used to bring orchid clippings by for propagation advice years back. A pause. Look, that's not why I'm calling. I need to talk to you in person, not on this line. We met him behind a shuttered feed store 40 minutes later, engine off, headlights off. He came around the corner on foot, hood up, hands jammed in his jacket pockets. Couldn't have been more than 21, with the same hollow, over-caffeinated look I probably had myself. You're not gonna believe me, he said before either of us said a word. So I brought proof. He held out a flash drive like it might go off in his hand. 4 years ago, my mom got real sick, he said. We didn't have insurance. My sister was about to lose her spot at state because we couldn't cover the tuition gap. I was ready to drop my program and work full-time so she could stay in. His voice wavered. Your grandmother heard about it at a co-op meeting, wired the whole gap, never said a word about it to me. I only found out because the notary let it slip by accident. He looked down at the drive in his own hand. I've been at Eastridge 8 months, run water quality intake 3 nights a week. 6 weeks ago, I noticed our discharge logs didn't match our actual outflow samples. Numbers on paper said one thing, What was actually coming out of the runoff pipes said another. Different how, I said, my voice sliding into the register I use on site. No room in it for anything but the data. PCBs, chlorinated solvents. Stuff that's been banned from ag runoff for going on 2 decades, at levels that should have shut the whole facility down the second anybody tested it honest. He pushed the drive at me. I copied 6 weeks of server logs before I lost access. Real numbers, side by side with what they reported to the state. You could go to prison for this, Julian said. Not a threat. A fact, laid flat on the table between them. The way he lays every fact he thinks a client needs to actually hear before they commit to something. I know what I could go to prison for. I looked it up before I ever plugged in a thumb drive. Mateo's voice didn't waver on that part at all. Why risk this now? Julian said quietly. You could lose everything. Because I already lost the version of me that was going to keep my head down and cash a paycheck while that runs into the valley's water table. His jaw tightened. My little cousins swim in that creek. Everybody's kids do. Your grandmother never asked me for anything back. I'm not asking either. I'm just done being quiet about it. He was gone within 2 minutes. Julian and I sat in the dark car with the drive between us like it might start ticking. I plugged it in back at the motel, Julian over my shoulder, working by the glow of the screen because neither of us trusted the overhead light not to throw shadows against the curtains. Rows of intake logs. I didn't need 6 weeks to see the shape of the lie. 6 minutes did it. Reported numbers sat suspiciously clean. Actual sensor readings, buried 3 folders deep in a maintenance archive nobody expected an outsider to open, told a different story. Contamination spikes lining up with dates going back years, long before Carter ever took over from his father. Near the bottom of the folder tree sat a subfolder somebody had deleted. Properly deleted, the kind that leaves a ghost trace if you know where to look. Forensic soil work isn't so different from forensic file recovery once you understand that erasure is never total. It took me 10 minutes to bring it back. A single spreadsheet, no labels, 3 columns of numbers that took a second to register as coordinates. I pulled up a map and typed the first set in. The pin dropped on a fenced, condemned lot 4 miles outside town. Unimproved, structural hazard, access restricted, according to the county assessor, the old Wright Sterling Research Facility, the lab that burned. They've been logging visits out there, I said, reading the timestamps. Recently. Most recent ones 11 days ago. Julian went quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had gone careful in a way I recognized. The way it always did right before he said something he didn't want to be true. Somebody's still going back to that fire. He looked at me across the dark car, and neither of us said the next obvious thing out loud. That whatever was still out there, waiting in the ash of a building that had already taken our parents from us once, we were about to walk straight toward it a second time. The fence was chain link, 8 feet, 1 sagging strand of barbed wire rusted through in 2 places. I found the gap by running my flashlight along the base until the beam caught a shadow that shouldn't have been there. Even outside, the smell reached us. Not smoke. That burned off decades ago. But what's left underneath where smoke used to be? Scorched concrete has its own signature, mineral and metallic, and 25 years hadn't scrubbed it clean. Char, rust, standing water, something faintly sweet that was probably mold. Security's on a 20-minute loop, Julian whispered, checking his watch against notes from 40 minutes watching the tree line. 2 guys, 1 truck. We've got maybe 15 once they clear the north corner. We went in low, through the gap, across a lot that used to be pavement and was now mostly weeds. The building was worse up close. Half the roof caved in, blackened beams jutting like broken ribs, windows gone, just ragged holes where glass used to be. Careful where you step, I said, mostly out of habit. Old fire sites leave the kind of contamination I spend my working life documenting. Heavy metals, breakdown byproducts, things that don't wash away just because enough years go by. We found the pillar exactly where the recovered coordinates said it would be. A support column near the building's rear corner, still standing while everything around it had come down. Julian ran a hand along it and felt the give. A section of concrete facade that wasn't concrete, just a thin shell, chipped at the edges from somebody else's hands. Somebody's more recent visit. Somebody's already been in here, I said. Then somebody already knows what's inside. His jaw tightened. Question is whether they took it or just checked it's still there. Only one way to find out. That's not comforting, Leo. Wasn't trying to be. He worked his fingers into the crack and the panel came away easier than it should have, worn smooth from being opened and closed more times than 25 years alone would explain. Inside, in a recess the size of a shoebox, sat a sealed metal cylinder, army green, built to survive weather or fire or both. My hands were steadier than I expected when I took it out. Some part of me had assumed that finally holding a piece of our actual parents, after a lifetime of holding only a story about them, would take my hands apart the way it was already taking apart everything else in my chest. It didn't. It just felt heavy. The seal gave with a hiss of trapped air. Inside, wrapped twice in plastic gone brittle and yellow, was a single spiral notebook. Julian held the flashlight. I opened the cover. Sarah Wright, the first page read, in handwriting I now knew on sight, having spent 2 nights with its twin in the pump house. If you're reading this, and I'm not the one who gave it to you, something has gone very wrong, and I'm so sorry. I don't remember sitting down. I just remember my legs stopped being something I was standing on, and I was on the cracked floor of a burned building with my back against the one pillar still holding up part of a roof that used to shelter our mother, reading her handwriting by my brother's flashlight while a truck engine idled somewhere on its 20-minute loop, getting closer. The entries ran across maybe 3 weeks. Some were technical, formula percentages, the same clipped shorthand as the pump house notebooks. But threaded through them, more each day, was fear written in a hand trying hard not to look afraid. Day 11. T.S. asked David directly today if we'd made copies. David lied, said no. T.S. didn't believe him. I could see it. That calm men get right before they stop pretending to negotiate. Day 14. Iris thinks I don't notice her watching the road every night before she locks up. I notice. I love her for it, and it terrifies me at the same time because Iris doesn't scare easy, and she's scared. Day 16. I'm 14 weeks along. We haven't told anyone. I keep thinking if I just get through the next few months quietly, none of this touches the baby. I don't believe that anymore. I write it down anyway because some part of me needs to see it on paper to remember I used to. Julian's hand found my shoulder and stayed there. The flashlight beam held steady. His hands, at least, hadn't started shaking yet. Day 19, the last entry read, ink pressed hard into the page, like she'd written it fast or angry or both. David came home late. Wouldn't tell me what happened until I made him. Thomas knows about the twins. He told David he's going to make sure our family doesn't get the chance to exist. David thinks he's bluffing to scare us quiet. I don't think he's bluffing. I'm putting this where Iris knows to look, in case I'm right and he isn't. I closed the notebook slower than I needed to. Like closing it fast might undo something. Julian was already on his feet, flashlight off, head tilted toward the sound that had just changed outside. Outside, an engine that had been a distant hum for the last few minutes suddenly wasn't distant anymore. Whatever came next, we weren't reading by flashlight anymore. We were about to be moving, fast, with our parents' last words zipped against my chest like something that could still be taken from us twice. We didn't get caught. I want to say that plainly because for about 90 seconds crouched behind that pillar, listening to the truck idle on the other side of a collapsed wall, I believed we would. A spotlight swept once across the caved roofline above us, and I stopped breathing entirely. Then it moved on, a routine sweep, not a search. We waited 11 more minutes before we moved. The notebook zipped inside my jacket like it needed a heartbeat of its own to keep going. Neither of us talked much on the drive back. There wasn't a version of talking about what we'd just read that felt survivable at highway speed. I knew something was wrong before Julian slowed the car. The porch light was on, which it never was this late. Grandma killed it after 10 to save the bulb, an old habit from thinner years. And the front door stood open a few inches, black space where there should have been a closed, locked seam of wood. Julian didn't park. He stopped the car in the middle of the drive, and we were both out and running before either of us said a word. Inside was worse than the porch light had prepared me for. Drawers pulled from the hutch, upside down on the floor. Books swept off the hallway shelf, spines cracked. Her chair, the green velvet one, knocked onto its side, one leg snapped clean off. "Grandma." Julian's voice cracked on the second syllable. Nothing answered. Just the clock, still ticking, absurdly steady against everything else in the room. I found the paper on the kitchen table, held down under a cold coffee mug. County letterhead. A physician's signature I didn't recognize, and under it, boilerplate I'd seen exactly once before on an unrelated case. An emergency involuntary hold, 72 hours, cause listed as risk to self due to confusion and agitation, witnessed by facility representative. "They took her on a psych hold," I said, my voice coming out flat, disbelieving. "There's nothing wrong with her mind." "Doesn't matter if there's nothing wrong." Julian had gone pale. Still, the way he gets in court right before he's about to lose an argument he knows he's right about. A signature from a licensed physician and 2 witnesses is enough to hold somebody 72 hours, no matter how sharp she is. It's not about truth. It's paperwork. We called every hospital within 40 miles. 2 hung up on us for asking too many questions too fast. One told us politely that patient information couldn't be disclosed under federal privacy law. The same law I'd spent years relying on to protect people, now closing over our own grandmother like water over a stone. Julian tried the county sheriff's non-emergency line next and got a hold music loop that ran for 6 minutes before a bored voice told him missing persons reports needed 24 hours. And no, an involuntary hold didn't count as an emergency. And no, he couldn't speak to a supervisor tonight. I watched him set the phone down very carefully on the counter, like slamming it would have felt too good to stop at just the phone. It was almost 2 in the morning when Julian's burner rang. A local area code neither of us knew. "This is Julian," he said, careful again. "Mr. Thorne, Father Miguel Reyes, from St. Bonaventure out on Route 9. An older voice, unhurried in a way that felt almost violent against how the last 3 hours had gone. "Your grandmother came to me 25 years back and asked me to hold something for her. Said someday 2 young men would come asking about it and I'd know it was really them because they'd know to ask about the orchids." Julian's eyes found mine across the wrecked kitchen. "What about the orchids?" he said slowly. "That's the thing. She never told me the rest. Just said you'd know." I thought about the 3rd pot from the left. Her stubborn child. "The black orchid," I said, leaning toward the phone. "Blooms every 2 years. Not always then." A pause, and something in the old man's voice loosened. "That's it. Come to the church. Come now if you can. I heard on the radio what happened to her tonight, and I think you'd better see this before anyone else does." St. Bonaventure at 2:30 smelled like old wood polish and stone that never warms up, no matter the season. Father Reyes met us at a side door in a cardigan pulled over pajama pants, hair standing up on one side, moving with the unhurried competence of a man who'd done this kind of quiet off-hours favor more than once in 50 years of parish work. She came to me not long after you boys arrived, he said, kneeling in front of an old floor safe bolted into a corner office behind the sacristy, dialing the combination from memory. Told me almost nothing. Said the less I knew, the safer we'd all be. He worked the handle. I've kept things safe for a lot of frightened people over the years. The ones who tell you the least are usually protecting you as much as themselves. The safe swung open. Inside sat a sealed manila envelope, edges soft with age. Grandma's handwriting fading across the front in blue ink. Not to be opened except by David and Sarah's sons, in person, together. Julian broke the seal. Inside was a single document, several pages, corners curled from humidity even through the sealed envelope. A partnership agreement, dated 4 months before the official Sterling AgroCorp patent filing. 2 signatures at the bottom. Iris Thorne. Thomas Sterling. He read it twice before he spoke. This is an original co-development agreement, he said. Signed, witnessed, notarized. It states the formula was jointly developed by Iris, David, and Sarah. Sterling only put up capital in manufacturing. He looked up. Leo, this isn't circumstantial. This is Thomas Sterling's own signature, admitting he didn't invent one molecule of what his company's worth today. Then we have him, I said. We have paper, Julian said, and I heard the old caution creep back into his voice. Paper wins in a courtroom eventually, after appeals. After a fight Carter can drag out until Grandma's gone and we've got nothing left to fight with. What we don't have is Carter himself on the record, saying it out loud. Not his father. Him. Something that can't get buried in a deposition. Father Reyes watched us both with the stillness of a man who'd spent a lifetime listening to people work through the exact moment their fear turned into a plan. You're going to have to make him think he's still got something left to protect, he said quietly. That's usually how you get men like that to talk. Julian looked at me, and I was almost certainly wearing the same look back. You want to bait a man who already tried to have us arrested on faked footage? I said. I want to bait a man who's been afraid of one specific thing for 30 years and hand him exactly that fear, gift-wrapped, so he shows up somewhere we control instead of somewhere he does. Julian folded the envelope shut, careful, like it was still fragile, even though the worst of it was already behind us. It's the only version of this where we're not just reacting to him anymore. Then we give him something to protect, he said. Something that isn't real. The rumor took 11 hours to travel from where we planted it to where we needed it to land. We didn't take it to Carter Sterling directly. That would have been clumsy, and clumsy gets you caught. Julian made one call instead, to a sheriff's deputy named Wade Ridley, a man both of us had heard, secondhand, took a very comfortable annual consulting fee from Sterling AgroCorp that never once showed up on a public disclosure form. We recovered materials from the pump house, Julian told him, tight-voiced, deliberately rattled. The performance of a man confiding something under pressure he couldn't quite control. There's a second ledger. Original, pre-filing, kept separate because Iris never trusted one hiding place. It's still at the Eastridge lab. Has to be. That's the only site with archive access old enough to predate the current building. None of it was true, but it was the kind of true-shaped lie a nervous man repeats badly to the wrong person within the hour. And Deputy Ridley did exactly what we were counting on, because men on somebody's payroll rarely wait for confirmation before reporting good news. By 6 that evening, Mateo, back on shift, badge still active because nobody at Eastridge yet knew what he'd handed us 3 nights before, sent one word to the burner phone. Moving. Carter left his own merger dinner 2 hours early tonight, Julian said, reading a text off the same phone a few minutes later. Valet knows Mateo from high school, said Sterling seemed agitated on the phone right before he asked for his car. We were already parked in the scrub brush a quarter mile from the Eastridge R&D building by then. The same low industrial complex where 6 weeks of falsified discharge logs had been sitting on a server waiting for somebody honest enough to notice. Julian had a recording app running on the burner. I had Grandma's old analog field radio clipped inside my jacket, the kind Sterling security sweep wouldn't think to scan for. Grandma insisted on being there. We'd argued about it for the better part of an hour back at the motel, and she'd won the way she always wins. Not louder, quieter, until arguing with her felt like arguing with a locked door. "I've been afraid of that building for 25 years, she'd said. "I'm done being afraid of it from a distance." She was in a wheelchair now, not because her legs had ever been the problem, but because 3 days of sedation during the psych hold had left her too weak for the distance on foot, and I hated Carter Sterling fresh every time I looked at her sitting in it. We wheeled her in through the loading dock at 11:40 on the code Mateo had given us before his shift ended, and left her in the small archive room off the main lab floor, lit only by a single emergency exit sign. A folder of blank paper arranged on the table in front of her to look, from a distance, exactly like what a frightened man would assume was the ledger he'd been sent to find. Julian and I took the ceiling crawlspace above the adjoining server room, close enough to hear, far enough to stay hidden. The metal groaned once under my knee, and I froze for a full 10 seconds, picturing every way this could go wrong before I made myself breathe and keep moving. Below us, through the grate, I could see the top of Grandma's head, perfectly still, waiting. Carter arrived alone at 12:06. I heard the keycard reader before I heard him. The scrape of a door granting access to a man who still believed, on some level, that this building and everything wrong that had ever happened inside it belonged entirely to him. He didn't see her at first. Fast footsteps, heading straight for the archive shelving. Then he stopped. "Ms. Thorne. Careful, quiet. You shouldn't be out of a hospital bed." I discharged myself. Grandma's voice through the radio carried the same steady, unhurried calm I'd heard my whole life. The one that used to mean a bad supplier was about to get exactly the correction he deserved. 72 hours is a long time to think, Carter. I thought about your father a great deal. I don't have time for this. A chair scraped, shoved aside. Where's the ledger? There isn't one. Silence. You're lying. His voice climbed half a register, a man doing math he didn't want to be doing. Ridley told you what my grandson wanted him to hear. A beat. Because I know exactly how a frightened man behaves when he thinks the last piece of proof is finally in reach. He comes alone, at night, to burn it himself, so nobody else ever has to know he was the one who lit the match. I heard him breathing hard now, and under it, unmistakable, the metallic click of a safety coming off. You have no idea what my father built. His voice had dropped the smug, unhurried thing it wore at the cottage 3 weeks back. Rawer now, closer to the bone. 30 years protecting what he made. I'm not losing it to a blind old woman and 2 men who don't even know who they really are. They know exactly who they are, Grandma said. I made sure of that myself. Then you already know how this ends. Boots on concrete, slow, deliberate. I'm finishing what my father started. And this time, there's nobody here to save you. Above him, I felt Julian's hand close around my wrist in the dark. Not to stop me, just to make sure I waited 1 more second, 1 more, until the moment actually needed us instead of just wanting us. You'll go to prison either way, Carter, Grandma said. The only question left is whether you go for what your father did or for what you're about to do yourself. Shut up. I raised better men than you out of worse starts. I know exactly what a coward sounds like when he's run out of road. I've replayed the next half second more times than I can count, and it still doesn't feel like it happened at the speed it must have. Grandma didn't flinch. A man she'd known since he was a boy at his father's company picnic stood somewhere in the dark pointing a gun at her, telling her nobody was left to save her. And she sat in that chair with her hands folded and didn't so much as tighten her grip on the armrest. You're wrong about that. Her voice wasn't quite steady, but she kept going anyway. There's more people here tonight than you think, Carter. I dropped from the ceiling panel before he'd finished processing what she meant. Landed harder than I meant to. Knee catching a shelving unit, loud enough that he spun, the gun swinging wide off her and toward me for one long, terrible second before Julian's voice came through a second speaker. Calm, procedural, the tone he uses when he already knows he's won and just needs the room to catch up. Mr. Sterling, look at her collar. His eyes went to Grandma's throat almost against his will, and I watched something in his face come apart when he found it. A small black disc, no bigger than a shirt button, clipped beneath the fold of her cardigan, a green light blinking steady in the dark. That's been live 6 minutes, Julian said, stepping out of the server room doorway, phone raised, the feed already past 400 viewers. Mateo had shared the link quietly to exactly the people who'd want to see it. Valley families whose well water had been tested and dismissed for years. A county reporter who'd been trying to get anyone at Sterling to answer for the Eastridge logs. And, because Julian had made one more call nobody but us knew about, a federal EPA investigator who'd been sitting on Mateo's server data for 18 hours, trying to decide if it was solid enough to act on. It was solid enough now. Carter Sterling standing over an elderly woman in a wheelchair with a drawn weapon saying out loud, on camera, that he intended to finish what his father started. That wasn't a piece of evidence anybody would spend years arguing about in a deposition. Turn it off. His voice had gone thin, almost young, stripped of everything that made him sound like a CEO. Turn it off right now. I don't control it, Grandma said. None of us do anymore. That's the point, isn't it? 25 years ago, your father made sure nothing I said would ever leave a room alive. Tonight, I made sure the opposite was true. He stood there long enough that I genuinely didn't know which way it would break. Long enough, I found myself running the same calculation Julian had to be running, distance and angle. How fast either of us could actually move if we needed to. Then outside, tires on gravel. More than one vehicle. Moving fast. Carter's whole body folded in around itself at the sound of it, gun hand dropping like it had gotten too heavy to hold up anymore. Federal agents came through the loading dock 40 seconds later. EPA enforcement first, 2 U.S. Marshals right behind them, because a live-streamed felony weapons charge against a disabled woman moves multi-agency coordination along a great deal faster than 18 hours of quietly reviewed server logs ever could on their own. Carter didn't resist. I think some part of him had stopped fighting the second he heard those tires. The same part, maybe, that had known since the moment he stood in front of our grandmother's greenhouse 3 weeks earlier that this was always where it would end. The trial took the better part of a year. I won't pretend I remember every hearing with the clarity I gave the nights that came before it. Grief and vindication move at a much slower, duller speed than fear does. And most of that year passed in the gray fog of depositions, continuances, and long silences in courthouse hallways. But I remember the days that mattered. I remember the EPA's lead investigator, a woman named Priya Anand, laying 6 weeks of Mateo Cruz's server logs across a courtroom screen next to Eastridge's official filings side by side, and letting the numbers do what numbers do better than any lawyer ever could. Nobody in that room needed a law degree to see 2 sets of figures that couldn't both be true. I remember Julian cross-examining Deputy Wade Ridley for 11 minutes about a consulting fee that had never once appeared on a disclosure form, watching the man's composure come apart, one evasive answer at a time, until he finally admitted, quietly, that he'd passed Julian's planted tip to Carter Sterling within the hour, because that was, in his words, part of the arrangement. What arrangement was that, Deputy? Julian asked. Keeping Sterling informed, Ridley said. About anything involving the Thorne family. Julian didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. I watched 2 jurors write that answer down word for word. I remember Mateo Cruz on the stand, in a suit that still had the fold creases from the store, answering the prosecution's questions in the same steady voice he'd used behind the feed store that night, not once looking over at the defense table where Carter sat. Afterward, in the hallway, He told me the EPA had offered him a whistleblower protection package along with a settlement large enough to cover his sister's remaining tuition twice over, and that his mother had cried on the phone for 10 minutes when he told her, and that he still didn't feel like he'd done anything except the minimum a person should do. I told him the minimum a person should do and what most people actually do are rarely the same thing, and he didn't have an answer for that, just nodded and looked at his shoes. I remember the defense trying once to argue that the pump house notebooks could have been planted, and Julian standing up without raising his voice at all and asking the defense's own forensic document examiner to explain, under oath, how a company could plant notebooks containing handwriting consistent entries about a formula's stability metrics that matched, number for number, internal Sterling Agro Corp production data the defense itself had already entered into evidence. The examiner didn't have an answer either. That was the day I stopped being nervous about how this would end. I remember the co-development agreement. Iris Thorne's and Thomas Sterling's signatures, side by side, 29 years old. Projected 12 feet tall on a screen while the prosecution's expert walked the jury through exactly what those two signatures meant. That the soil remediation formula powering a company worth several $1 billion had never belonged to Sterling Agro Corp alone. That two people who died in a fire ruled accidental had signed their names to it in the same ink as the man whose son now sat at the defense table. And I remember the verdict itself, delivered on a Tuesday morning in a courtroom that smelled like the coffee nobody had finished. Carter Sterling standing very still in a suit that no longer looked like it fit him the way it had at Grandma's greenhouse gate. Guilty, environmental contamination, obstruction of justice, assault with a deadly weapon. On top of that, a civil judgment recognizing the original 1997 agreement as valid and dissolving Sterling Agro Corp's exclusive claim to the patent entirely. The technology our parents built, the one that cost them their lives before either of us had learned to walk, went into a public agricultural trust, free for any farmer in the valley to use without a licensing fee, administered by a board that for the first time in 30 years listed Iris Thorne's name correctly spelled and never once footnoted. Thomas Sterling didn't live to see any of it. He died 4 years before we ever knew to go looking for him, which meant the full reckoning fell, in the end, entirely on his son. Incomplete and overdue at the same time, the kind of justice Grandma told me once was the only kind the world usually has on offer. Carter's sentencing hearing was short. I sat 2 rows behind the prosecution with Julian on one side of me and Grandma's wheelchair parked in the aisle on the other. And when the judge asked if the defendant had anything to say, Carter turned around in his chair and looked at her. Not at me, not at Julian, at her. For a long moment before he turned back around and said nothing at all. I think that was the most honest thing he did the entire year. The Eastridge facility is gone now, not torn down, repurposed. Where the old pump house used to sit, hollow and rotting at the edge of the orchard, there's a low stone building instead, glass-walled, full of soil samples and seedling trays, and most days a rotating handful of graduate students studying exactly the kind of remediation science our mother helped invent and was never allowed to put her name to. They call it the Wright Botanical Research Sanctuary. Julian handled the paperwork himself, pro bono, the first case he took after the firm reinstated him with what I still consider an insultingly small apology and a fruit basket neither of us ever opened. We stood together at the ribbon cutting, the two of us in suits that fit better than the ones we'd worn to any hearing that year, watching a county official read our parents' names off a plaque neither of us had written, but both of us had approved every word of. Julian didn't say anything for a while afterward. Neither did I. We just stood there watching graduate students carry seedling trays into a building with our mother's maiden name carved over the door. And at some point he bumped my shoulder with his, the way he used to when we were kids and neither of us had the words for something big. Dad would have hated the ribbon, he said finally. Too much fuss? Mom would have loved it. Mom would have loved the fuss and pretended she didn't. I laughed, and it surprised both of us because I couldn't remember the last time laughing at something about our parents hadn't also felt like it might tip over into something else entirely. Father Reyes still keeps that same floor safe behind the sacristy, though these days it mostly holds parish donation records instead of other people's secrets. He came out to the cottage the week after the verdict, sat on the porch with Grandma for 2 hours drinking coffee neither of them touched, and told me on his way out that some people spend their whole lives waiting to find out whether the thing they protected was worth protecting. He said watching Iris Thorne find out felt like the best part of his year. Mateo finished his degree the following spring. He works in water policy for the county now, the same office that used to sign off on Eastridge's falsified reports without ever double-checking them, and I like to think that particular irony isn't lost on anybody who works there with him. Grandma still lives in the cottage, still keeps the orchids on that same windowsill, still finds them by feel rather than sight, still waves off help she doesn't strictly need. Some mornings I drive out and find her already outside, cane in one hand, the other pressed flat against the soil where the lavender used to grow before a bulldozer tore it out. New plants in now, stubborn, slow to take, exactly the way she likes them. I asked her once, not long after everything settled, why she never told us sooner. Not as an accusation. I think I just needed to hear the answer out loud one more time, in a voice that wasn't shaking with fear anymore. Because I wasn't protecting a secret, Leo, she said, turning her face toward the sound of my voice the way she always does. I was protecting the two of you. That's all it ever was. I didn't ask anything else. Some things you only get told once, and I'd learned, finally, not to push for a second copy. Julian still drives out most Sundays. We sit on the porch, the three of us, and most of the time we don't talk about any of it. The fire, the trial, the year we spent sleeping in motels paid for in cash. We talk about the orchids instead, about which ones are stubborn this season and which ones surprised her, about nothing at all, which is its own kind of gift after a year when every single conversation we had felt like it might get one of us killed. Some evenings I catch her tilting her face toward the greenhouse, toward a shape she can't see anymore but still knows is standing there, whole. And I think that's probably as close to peace as any of us are going to get. And that it's enough. Would you risk everything to uncover your family's dark past? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell.